Hello, welcome to study day 3 of the Yoga Sutras. We will be covering Sutra 5, and we'll say this one has a lot to it, and if someone was to read it by themselves, it's kind of like pushing and pulling you like all over the place. Oh, hey, Stacy. So this one talks about the 5 kinds of vrittis or mental modifications. And I'll kind of go over it a little briefly so as people come in, this won't get too confusing. Because again, like this book, it's just accompanied notes, or I don't know if I'm using the right word. It's just a montage of different notes from different students who tried to write down all of the key teachings from their yoga teachers. And all of these, though, are coming from the Vedic texts, which are over 5,000 years old. And we say over because the first recorded date of these are 5,000 years. However, typically back then they did not write down the teachings until they had been being taught for a really long time. They were just orally transferred, which is why these are in notation form. So the students were writing down what their teachers were saying, and they said, these are so important, we need to share these. We need them to be written down. And so the teachers didn't write things down, and typically the students didn't either. They would just sit and absorb and discuss. And so over 5,000 years old. One of the oldest texts is the Vedic text. And this is in no means all of the Vedic text by any means. It is the teachings, key takeaways. And this is particularly on the practice of yoga and yoga of the mind. So there is yoga of the body, and this is the yoga of the mind, which is the Yoga Sutras. Okay, so Patanjali, which means like wise teacher, who is teaching all of this, which most likely was multiple people, says there are 5 kinds of vrittis. And again, these are grouped into 2 major categories. One variety brings us pain, and the other does not. And we can even see this with modern day psychology did this as well. So they said, this is the worst case scenario, and so neutral must be the best case. And that's the way psychology believed for a very long time. But in fact, there's worst case, there's neutral, and then there's best case. And there's all these spaces in between. So that's why he says there's pain and then there's all the other stuff. Because we don't want to just say pain and pleasure. That puts us in a false thought and can in turn cause us pain. Because we think, well, this isn't pleasure. And we start to cause this our own mental suffering by thinking we need to be in pleasure all the time. And so often yoga uses the word bliss instead of pleasure. And so bliss does not necessarily mean pleasure. It's this sensation of nothingness, but happiness at the same time. So not this overjoy, overexcitement, but this content. And so yoga's bliss might be different than what the typical American culture says, like, oh, I'm blissed out, man. And in fact, even in a state of bliss, say you're high or someone's high and they're blissed out, does that mean that they're happy? And what is happy? So how do we gauge when we are happy and when we're not happy? Well, the other studies will say that happiness is what we achieve when we're developing ourselves, right? Like when we've learned something new and we feel this sense of accomplishment, whether we get external reward or not, we feel this pang of growth, and that is what creates happiness. And so that is again why yoga says yoga is so amazing, because yoga is self-development. Yoga is this constant pursuit of improvement, and not in this sense that we're damaged goods, but in the sense of we should always be growing ourselves. Because if we're not growing, then we're becoming stagnant. And as we can see in nature, nothing just stays stagnant. When you stay in stagnation, there's actually a degradation. And so you are either moving forward or you're devolving. So we want to evolve or devolve. And so if you find yourself in life where you're not progressing and you're just kind of avoiding progressing forward, that to know that in that stance, in that period of life, by not growing and evolving, you are like backsliding, as if life was this slight incline hill. And if you were to sit still, you're going to start to slowly look back. And then one day you wake up, right? And I guarantee you, all of us at some point have experienced this. One day we wake up and we're like, how did my life get, like, how did I get here? When did this happen? Do I hate life so much? I think we at least once in our life we've felt that way. And then we're never really getting bored. We're never really feeling like we're not doing something. Like that is when we feel happy, is when there's constant progress. And we even see this in statistics in the workplace, right? People don't want to stay in the same job anymore. Like people want to keep at least getting a promotion or getting a new project or something of the sort. And that's one of the biggest reasons for people leaving a company, leaving a job nowadays, is because they want that constant growth. And we have to ask ourselves, is that an obsession? Is that an attachment to it? Or is that a more intrinsic yogic quality for self-development and improving ourselves? So notice that he does not divide the thoughts into painful or pleasurable. Why? Because even a so-called pleasurable thought might ultimately bring us pain. And this is where we start to get into, like, nothing is bad, nothing is good, everything is relative. And it's like, that piece of cheesecake probably tasted really great the first 5 bites, and then by the time you get to the end, you're like, I can't take another bite. It's too much. Or, the kid that ate all the candy and then they're sitting there with a stomach ache, thinking to themselves, I'm never going to eat candy again. I feel so sick. Anything that we deem as pleasurable can turn into pain, because nothing is good, nothing is bad, everything is relative. And we know that everything is relative, right? Because sometimes a day seems like it goes by so fast, and sometimes a day seems like it goes by slow, and even time is relative. All of it comes back to where we are in our mind. Because, again, we can have a good day, we can have a bad day, and maybe it's just because something happened that morning and it spoiled the whole rest of the day. Well, was it that thing that really spoiled it? No, it affected our mind. We allowed it to affect our mind, and then it tinted our vision for the rest of the day so that we only saw the negative in everything. And so that comes back to us. That becomes back to our responsibility of how we react and respond And do we want to react, or would we rather be mindful and work on our own control of our mind so that we can respond to each situation, so that we're not acting out of pleasure, we're not acting out of pain, we're not acting out of anger, that we see the situation for as the situation is, and we recognize that our feelings are separate from that situation, and that we don't allow the mind to take control of us, that we take control of the mind, that we recognize the mind is a tool for us to utilize, and that it is not in control of us. And this is one of the biggest teachings here in the Yoga Sutras. And again, we cannot easily know in the beginning whether a particular thought will bring pain or not. Some thoughts begin with pain, but end us leaving us in the feeling of peace. And others appear to be pleasurable, but bring us pain. For example, pity at another's suffering certainly causes us pain, but ultimately it expands our hearts and minds and gives us understanding. Instead of using the words painful and painless, we might be able to understand this point if we use two other words. And let's call them selfish or selfless. Now, when yoga uses the word selfish, it's going to elaborate on the word selfish, because selfish is a complicated word. And so is selfless. Because again, no matter what we do, we're always acting from self. We are our own experiences, our own frame of mind, our own tinted glasses. We are always acting from self. So whatever action we take is always stemming from the self. That being said, even the typical thought of selfless, which we covered in day one, we always want to protect our own peace. So to be selfless in a way that we're sacrificing our own peace is a no-no. We don't do that. Don't do it in a way that we let down our boundaries, which if we let down our boundaries is when we're sacrificing our own peace. Your own peace is important. And so if we can act selflessly and it's not disturbing our own peace, then it's okay, right? Like sometimes we can do things and we're being selfless and we feel great about helping others. And we're not sacrificing anything and it feels amazing and we want to keep doing that. That's the kind of selflessness that yoga is talking about. When we can have our boundaries and still help people. And some of us can do this with our jobs. And some of us can also like deplete ourselves from our jobs as well, because we detach from ourselves so much that we give ourselves to other people, and we don't want to give all of ourselves to another person. Again, that's stealing away your inner peace and your right to be a self. And also, like all of you, like your experiences, your stories, someone else doesn't need all of that, because then you're just going to contaminate them as well, because they have their own and they're not going to see yours the same way. Going a little deep there. Our ultimately bring pain. For example, to love something or somebody is pleasurable. But many of you experienced how the very same love brought you a lot of unhappiness, pain, hatred, jealousy, and so on. Why? Because that love was not just pure love, but it was based on some expectation in return. And that's the foundation of any couples therapy. What is the expectation? What is the attachment? Because we can't expect someone else to understand our mind, to understand our experiences or our stories. And we can't expect someone to read our mind. So it's our job to read, and that's part of those boundaries. Like we have to communicate that. It is very selfish to just assume Sorry, I ate some quinoa and it's getting stuck in my throat. It's very selfish to put an expectation on someone and they're not aware of that expectation. If there was selfishness in it, the expectation may be anything. A little financial comfort, some publicity. With this exception, love seldom lasts long. So love, though it appears to be painless thought, ultimately ends in pain if it's based on selfishness. And so to truly love someone would mean that you don't have any expectations of them, that you don't expect them to change. You don't expect any of these things. And this is one of those fine lines, I think, where a lot of people get confused in yoga of saying, like, how is marriage and all of that. And this is, again, where yoga says that's up to your religion. That's up to personal or societal beliefs. But you should ultimately judge what it feels like for you. And I won't get too far into that because that one gets a little debatable within the yoga field because it's not extremely addressed. It's talking about this in this very general sense. On the other hand, a thought like anger might bring pain in the beginning. The anger of a selfless person has no personal motive behind it. Although the anger may cause someone to feel bad in the beginning, ultimately it helps that person to correct himself or herself and lead to a better life. So if we get angry at ourselves, but also it's okay to experience anger. It's okay to experience these emotions. It's when we let the emotion take charge of us. If we're being inspired by the emotion to change, to grow, then there's no harm. But if we are getting so caught up in that emotion that we are no longer in charge, and like I hear this all the time, I couldn't help it. I was so angry. I couldn't help it. I wasn't in control anymore. It was the anger. Constant conversation with my kids. Right? With the mamas who hear that a lot. Or even as a parent, right? Like it's very easy to get caught up in all of the emotions. But as we can learn to take control of our mind, we can learn to find discernment, which is our buddhi, and we can empower that part of the mind. And the only way to grow your buddhi is through meditation. And allow ourselves to have more discernment. And the ego, the I part of yoga, part of our mind, it's not bad. Nothing is good and nothing is bad. It's all necessary. It's all there for a reason. It all has purpose. So anytime anything happens, do not classify it as bad or good, painful or pleasurable. Just notice its purpose. Notice its point of relativeness. Notice what was the intention behind it. Were you acting with a selfish thought or a selfless thought? What was the intention? Okay, for example, a little strictness on the part of a classroom teacher is needed to reform the children and make them understand their responsibilities. Whatever the thought is, if there is no selfishness behind it, it can never bring pain to the person concerned. The result is neither pain nor pleasure, but peace. Seeking the truth, we should analyze all of our motives and try to cultivate selfless thoughts. That is our first and foremost duty. And so when you go to do something, ask yourself, am I doing this with the intention that I get something out of it? Or am I doing this with the intention of helping someone and there are added benefits to me, but that's not the primary focus? Such as I teach this a lot in sales and for business owners, that we should be acting first and foremost as the service we're providing is helping someone else. Because when we present a sale, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, when someone's trying to sell to you and they're not putting your best interest in mind, you can feel it, that they're just wanting the money, that they're just wanting the sale. And yeah, it's going to help you, but that's second, right? Or the person that says, I'm going to really do something that's going to help you. This is going to help you. I know it's going to help you. Otherwise, I wouldn't try to sell it to you. Like, which one feels better? And not to say for a salesperson to be trickery about it, but to be authentic about that. And it becomes their own self-development program and their own spiritual practice. Like, them selling becomes a spiritual practice. And this is an important aspect for anyone who is, we call soulpreneurs or spiritual entrepreneurs. This happens a lot for yoga teachers, and this happens a lot for artists, and this happens a lot for people that are in the energy sciences. They have a real struggle selling to people because they don't want to portray that feeling of trying to take something from someone. And so we should always approach everything we do, even when it comes down to something like selling, by how are we helping others? And that should be the first and foremost thought. But of course, we also need our piece in our own energy exchange. And energy exchange is important no matter what, even if it's bartering with someone, if it's anything of the sort. There should always be an equal energy exchange. Otherwise, you're depleting yourself and you're giving away your peace. And so that goes back to that piece. Some people say, I thought that in the name of meditation and yoga, we were supposed to make the mind blank and without thoughts. But you cannot make the mind thoughtless, especially immediately. Many people try, but it's impossible. And this is a really, really important part. Because as a meditation teacher, I often hear people say, I can't meditate. And I'm like, oh, you should come to meditation. I can't meditate. And I'm like, why can't you meditate? Can you breathe? And they're like, but I just can't get my mind to calm down. And I'm like, that's the point of meditation, is to help you calm the mind down. It is not for you to go into it and be like, okay, now turn your mind off. It is possible, but it's not like quiet all the time. And meditation, my mind goes crazy all the time. And that's one of the points, is to watch the thoughts, to look at the thoughts and notice where you're judging. I'm going through my mind and be like, oh, that's bad. I shouldn't be thinking that. Right? How many times have we done this? Have you ever been thinking a thought and you're like, that's horrible. I shouldn't think this thought. And then, be like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about everything. Why can't I stop thinking? Even if you started your meditation practice, if you sat down for 10 minutes and you started, the mind was going at 100 miles per hour and you slowed it down to 80, you've made progress. Like, that's beautiful. You were able to slow it down a little bit. Now, ultimately, what happens in meditation is that we are slowing down the mind. And as some of us know, the brain waves, most of the time we are at a higher, faster brain wave. As adults, we get into this higher, faster brainwave, and we're tapping into that frontal lobe and our higher thinking. And as we get into this higher thinking as an adult, it gets really hard for us to slow down and see things from the first time perspective, or from a child's mind, or from a higher level. Hey, Bethany, thanks for joining. So I was just saying that some people say, I thought in the name of meditation and yoga, we were supposed to make the mind blank without thoughts. And Patanjali says, this is impossible. And so the goal is to slow the mind down. And so when we can get into alpha waves, which is possible when we use that breath, or we do the body scan, we slow the mind down, we get into alpha waves, and then my battery's getting low. And then we get into theta, and then when we're sleeping, we get into delta. Let me plug my computer in real quick. Otherwise, we're going to get cut short. Oh, almost there. Okay. And we utilize this in some meditation practices, especially when we start getting into rewriting the subconscious thoughts, such as in yoga nidra or hypnotherapy. There's techniques that people have came into this realization on their own, such as like the Silva method, where they recognized after playing with all of this that they're like, oh, hey, and they came to these same realizations that yoga was already talking about. And I love when things like that happen, because that just shows the truth. And we can see this even like there was yoga and Pilates and the natural method within the exercise world. And it was all getting popular, but none of them were really conversing. I think maybe they had a little bit of yoga, especially Pilates. I think there was a little bit of yoga influence. But we can see these things starting to happen, and recognizing when multiple people are finding the truth at the same time. It's a beautiful thing. And this is where we can see so many commonalities between religions all over the world. It's because those are the truths reuniting and able for us to collect those truths. Okay. And it says, many people say, I have made my mind vacant. How do they know the mind is vacant? They are aware of it, and that awareness is a thought. So if you think to yourself, my mind is vacant, then technically it's not, because you just had a thought, an awareness that it's vacant. So you noticed a sensation and you had a thought. So this is where he's trying to prove his point that the mind's job is to think. The mind's job is to keep observing, right? That's its primary function, is to observe. And its observations are what keeps us safe. It allows us to go, okay, that works, that doesn't work, that caused pain, that caused pleasure. Okay, I'm going to stay away from this, I'm going to go for that. Like, that's the mind's job, is to keep us safe. Like, oh, was that a snake? What was that noise? All of these things to keep us safe. So if you've removed all thoughts and retained this one thought of having made the mind vacant, that is not the real thoughtlessness. That is why we use the trick of developing certain positive thoughts while removing negative ones. And this itself is such a beautiful concept, and we use this concept in my Well Nourished program. And it's the thinking that it's really hard to just stop a habit. If I said, okay, just stop drinking coffee every day, or just stop smoking cigarettes. And I say these because these are like big ones people can relate with, or at least know of a circumstance where this has happened to someone else. Just to stop is really hard. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. What becomes easier, and we do this in nutrition, is to replace it with something positive. So that every time you get a craving for one thing, you have that replacement to go, okay, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do this. And so we replace the negative with something positive. For example, in our Well Nourished program, we say you're going to eat 12 servings of vegetables a day. You can eat whatever else you want, but you have to get in the 12 servings of vegetables. What ends up happening? There's no room for the negative. they're getting so caught up in trying to get the vegetables in for the day that before they know it, they're so full and they're so nourished, they no longer have the cravings or have the ability to eat those cravings. Where I'm like, sure, yeah, you can have ice cream as long as you get your 12 servings of vegetables in a day, which is not technically something I say. But it's like you can have that treat, you can have something, but just get in all the positive. And it pushes it out. It takes up space. And so we put in what we want, we put in all the good stuff, and we don't make any room for all the negative stuff. And so we can do this with our thoughts also. So say, and this is my comment, I'm cleaning out my closet and I'm like, I am so disorganized. I stop myself and I say, no, I am getting organized. I am getting so organized. Or I think to myself, I wish I could meditate in the morning. I tell myself, I meditate every morning and I'm so proud of myself for doing it. And so I reframe everything into the positive and give myself positive affirmations. But also, how can we do that in any circumstance? How can we take ourselves out of complaining and make every conversation and make every sentence that comes out of our mouth something positive? Instead of saying, I don't want to kill you, you could say, I am your friend. It says it. I am interested in your welfare and peace, so please listen to me. Do not create thoughts that will rebound you. Forget the selfishness, make others happy, and you will be the happiest person. And I, as a therapist, this is something we often do. If you are suffering with something, go help someone else that's also suffering, especially if they're suffering in something similar, and go help them. And you will teach yourself so many lessons and so many things that you needed to hear, and it's end up being you telling someone else and in turn telling yourself. That is the quickest way to gratitude and happiness. And because it allows us to evolve. By seeing others happy, you can't be unhappy. By making everybody unhappy, you can never be happy yourself. So if you're going around causing pain and complaining and just poisoning other people's energy, you're never going to be happy. If you really want to be selfish in the idea of retaining your peace. There is no harm in that selfishness, because by that, you are not going to harm anybody. Instead, you will be bringing the same peace to others also. If the mind says, I can't be selfless, I must be selfish, tell it, all right, go ahead and go to the other extreme and be selfish in refusing to disturb your own peace. And this one particularly for women, for mamas, for wives, girlfriends. Notice when your peace is being sacrificed, when someone else is not honoring your peace as much as you honor their peace. And no one can protect your peace the way you can. And so that is a job for you, not someone else. You have to protect your own peace. You can't expect your spouse or your children to protect your peace, or your parents to protect your peace. They support it, but that is your job. And you can't wait for someone else to do that for you. Get off my soapbox. In our daily lives, we always work with these two categories of thoughts. And now we know that a selfish thought will bring us misery, and a selfless one leaves us in peace. And so even if we did something and maybe it didn't end well, if we know that we did our best and we did it out of selflessness, we don't feel guilty. If we did it and we had this thought of we were in it for ourselves and we spoiled it, that's what leaves us with regret. It's very hard to be mad at ourselves if we gave it our best, if we gave it our selflessness. What often causes some pain is when we're like, but I sacrificed myself for it. I put everything into it, and we gave up some of our peace, and then we're upset. So also note that. We watch carefully the moment of a thought and the form it arises in the mind. We become analysts. This itself is a yogic practice, watching our thoughts and analyzing them. And there is meditation, right? And we practice meditation as our gym and our exercise routine in order to grow our mindfulness muscle. So just as we would go to the gym for the body, we want to go to the gym for the mind. And each time you notice a thought or you're pulled away and you go, oh, I was just thinking, and I can't, you come back. That is like one repetition and getting your mind stronger in that neuroplasticity. And the more and more we do that, the more and more we can become mindful, and it becomes easier to do that in everyday life. Just as if we were going to the gym to strengthen our legs, and then we're able to move around easier, and we're able to support our knees better, and we're able to go for a longer walk and do other things. The exercise at the gym doesn't stop at the gym. It benefits the rest of our life, just like the meditation practice benefits our mind more than just the meditation practice. So yes, we calm our mind, we get it calmer, we lower that vibration, and we allow ourselves to tune in, but it goes beyond just that meditation practice. And studies after studies have shown this, that people that meditate for 8 weeks, their brain chemistry changes, their view of life changes. And so I urge you to try to make it a priority, because if you want to change your life, and meditation is the way to do it. And often people avoid it because they don't want to sit and analyze their thoughts. Because often people sit and analyze their thoughts and it's emotional for them. And the emotions are there, but we're also becoming in charge and saying that emotion is not good or bad. It's just there. And so to approach your thoughts with non-judgment. And these first few chapters are the basis for Jon Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness meditation that he has written so many books on. And it's just building up our mindful muscle. Okay? So thank you so much for joining me tonight. Again, this was verse 5 of the Yoga Sutras, book 1. And in book 1, I believe there is, I'm like, while I'm here. Book 1, I'll tell you how many verses are in. Right there? Yes. There are 51 verses in book 1. And so we're only going through about 7 or 8 of them. I believe it's tomorrow's lesson. We're combining a few very short ones. So hang in there for the ride. All right, ladies. If you can, type in the comments below whether you're in the course or you're in the Facebook group, if you're watching it live or you're watching a replay. Let me know what your key takeaways are. Let me know what it is that really stood out to you, what seemed important, or just kind of hung on to you for some reason. Okay. Thank you, Bethany. I'm so glad that you got to attend. And I hope you have a lovely Sunday. Sunday is kind of my chill out day a little bit. So I always look forward to my Sundays. I hope you do too. And it's a holiday weekend. Woohoo! That was a surprise to me, actually. I completely did not realize it was a holiday weekend. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have Monday off. That's amazing. So extra meditation on Monday for me. All right. Bye.